Part 4. I Don't Want to Go to Heaven. Chapter 1. And as I sat beside you, I felt the great sadness that day. It was eerie how Jedediah's heart beat wildly in Psychopomp's bloodied hand. It didn't beat while locked in his ribcage, secure between lungs and bone, but exposed to the light, it beat as though it would never cease. Jedediah's breathing was shuddery and strained, his sternum crushed, his chest concave and open, bleeding onto the pristine stone floor. He coughed, a splatter of blood splashing out of his mouth and onto the ground. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Jedediah's face was red with rage and his own blood. His teeth bared, stained with agonizing red, that same red now beginning to drip from his nostril, eyes filled with tears of rage and pain that streamed down his cheeks nearly as quickly as the blood. Psychopomp did not answer as they turned towards the scale. "Don't you fucking ignore me!" The wildly beating heart was placed on the scale. "Sigh, you fucking—" Jedediah stopped mid-sentence. His eyes, original and new, were wide. Octavius kept his focus on him as he stayed entirely still. He didn't breathe, he didn't cry, he didn't blink. He only watched, intensely. Thoth rose from his seat, a clipboard in hand. The devourer awoke from beneath his feet and rose to its own. It let out a low, ominous rumbling, like that of a predator. Its eyes were focused on Jedediah, gleaming with ravenous hunger as it prowled around the two men. "Beginning the judgment of Jedediah Smith. Here, your sins shall be weighed against the feather of might. Should you pass this judgment, you shall be gifted your promised eternity. Should you fail, your soul will be ripped asunder by Ammit, the devourer of the dead, as are all the wicked." Psychopomp's gaze turned back to Jedediah. "Do you understand these terms?" Jedediah nodded silently. "Very well." Thoth and Psychopomp removed the stills from beneath the scale's cups. For a moment, the balance was off, as the device adjusted to its new freedom. Eerily silent, save for the creaking of the old scale. After what felt like an eternity, it finally came to a rest. Jedediah's heart remained in its cup, still beating wildly, now equally balanced with the pristine feather. Octavius let out a sigh of relief. Despite all their fighting and harsh words in life, they hadn't committed any atrocities. Or at least Jedediah hadn't. The devourer's rumbling ceased, but the ominous stalking of its prey did not. The heart disappeared from the scale, returning before Jedediah, who took it in his hand. With golden swirling mists, his ribs rebuilt themselves and his sternum healed, resealing his lungs in the confines of his chest. Jedediah took a breath in with a wince. The eyes began to close, receding back into his skin. Jedediah's anger melted away as the eyes vanished, his bloody smile stretching across his face. "Aki, look! I'm back to normal!" Octavius smiled alongside him, before choking on his own blood. Psychopomp had approached the two while they were watching Jedediah heal, and had plunged their other hand into Octavius's ribs. Grasping his heart, they ripped it out in the same fashion as before. Jedediah supported Octavius again, helping the love of his afterlife remain stable. "I got you, baby, I got you." Octavius heaved and coughed, but looked up at Jedediah before locking all of his eyes on the scale. "Beginning the judgment of Gaius Octavius." Psychopomp repeated the same terms to a frozen, wide-eyed Octavius. He accepted the terms silently, as Jedediah did. His heart was placed in the same cup as Jedediah's was, and set free to balance. Another eerily still moment passed. Octavius felt the eyes of the devourer burning into his back. Thankfully, his heart balanced with the feather as well. When the heart rested in his hand at last, his flinch of pain almost knocked him over as the eyes began to recede. The ones on his feet went last, and he finally regained his ability to stand freely. "Oh, I'm glad we never have to go through that again," he joked as he got his balance back. Shaking his limbs a bit, he noticed his hand was, at last, free of prying eyes on every joint. Immediately, he used his free hand to clasp Jedediah's. "I've been meaning to hold your hand for a while now." Jedediah laughed that lovely laugh Octavius loved so much. "Well, there you go. Eyeballs are gone and you're all set." Psychopomp had returned to their previous form, or forms, if one counted the two perspectives. "I can take you back to your paradises now, since we're done here." "Now, just one sec, Si. What the hell was all this about?" Jedediah demanded. "I agree, Lord Mercury. Why was this done to us?" Octavius shouted in tandem. "Easy, easy. It's 'cause of your buddy's magic is all." Psychopomp held up their hands. They weren't used to souls being full of righteous anger. An amused chuckle echoed in the dark. It was only a matter of time until I saw you two. A new being was in the room. He sat opposite Thoth, on the other end of the scale. He kept up the trend of forms, his body human and his head a falcon's. Upon his head rested a golden crescent, which held a silver disc covered in craters. And who are you supposed to be? Jedediah asked with venom in his voice. Octavius elbowed Jedediah in the ribs. The figure only smiled. The one who's given your plastic forms life for the past 50-odd years. It was my magic that enchanted that tablet, after all. That makes your souls mine. He rose from his seat, approaching the pair. His eyes were as dark as the night itself. I am the greatest god of the great gods, embracer, pathfinder, healer. I am the one who caused the crescent moon to shine. He knelt before the men, a hand resting on his knee. I am Khonsu. He extended a hand out to the pair. And I would like to make a deal. Frantically, Aquanra checked the tablet's combination over and over, holding it up to the moon's light. Come on! He strained, trying to recontact Jedediah. The tablet only glowed for a moment before returning to its normal state. Why isn't it working? He shook the tablet in his hands vigorously. Tears began to well in his eyes again. Ak, relax. Nick held Aquanra around the shoulders. Breathe. They'll let us through when they're ready. How can you possibly know that? Nick patted the pharaoh on the back. His grief was still fresh, after all, even with the tablet's magic. But why couldn't they get through to them all of a sudden? Oi, Night Guard! Nick turned around to see Javier standing at the entrance to Aquanra's room. Mind catching me up on the past few years? Chapter 2. When we parted, my heart wanted to die. Khonsu had changed his position to sit on the floor, carefully wiping the blood from the two men's faces. I find you two immensely entertaining. Lovers, in an embrace, only truly understanding after death. Oh, it's like a fairy tale. The moon god mock swooned as they dissipated the bloody rag in their hand. As such, you have earned my favor. Octavius bowed for a moment. Jedediah rubbed the back of his head. Shucks. Khonsu pointed to one, then the other. Oh, decisions. Psychopomp raised a brow. What decisions? We've already made 'em. Khonsu rested their chin in one hand. Which one I want to give my boon? Your boon, sir? The lunar deity smiled at Octavius. With my power, I can send one of you back, but only one. Only one? Send us back to where, sir? Khonsu held out his hand. Within, a small crescent moon formed, its light forming into a window. Through it, they could see a familiar sight, the front area of their museum. Rexy wasn't in their usual place, so it was likely nighttime. Life, of course. It felt as though an icicle had been driven through the two men's chests. The offer of a lifetime. A return to living. The two men met eyes again and held hands. Their expressions matched, faces contorted in fear. Why? Octavius was the first to break the silence. Pardon? Why only one of us? Why can't we both go? Khonsu shook his head. Your death is on the record now. The dead cannot return to life, for it would compromise human existence to confirm an afterlife. But look, the window changed again. There is only one body. The two men cringed as they were shown their remains, mangled, melted plastic. They could almost smell the ash and smoke from Pompeii again. 2 souls from one corpse. The numbers are off. We can't have that, can we? The window receded, the crescent moon waxing away to nothing. Your heart is what connects you to the mortal world. It acted as the bridge for all those souls to get lost in your bodies. Khonsu explained, swirling the stray moonbeams in his hand. If one is destroyed, and your ties to the mortal world are severed, the other may return. Neither of the two men wanted to make that decision. Their eyes met, both welling with tears. Octavius sobbed as he held his arms out to Jedediah. The two men held each other close, hearts in their hands. I think it should be you, Jedediah. Jedediah shook his head. No. Octavius rested his head into the crook of his lover's neck. You're an exhibit of American history. You're needed there more than I am.
but I need you there with me.
Jedediah sobbed in Octavius's embrace.
I don't want to go.
Octavius wept alongside him.
I know. I don't want you to leave.
Jedediah dug his fingers into Octavius's back.
Don't make me go. Please. Please don't make me go.
Octavius held his heart in his hand.
Jedediah, I'm sorry I didn't tell you I loved you sooner.
His fingers tightened around the organ.
I'll wait as long as I need to for you.
Jedediah noticed the lack of an arm wrapped around him.
Octavius, no!
Octavius's heart was crushed in an instant by his own hand. Jedediah's face shattered like glass, his pieces falling away into mist. Octavius wailed as his reflection in Jedediah's eyes drifted away.
He's not skimming, carissime. He's not skimming.
He begged, cupping Jedediah's cheeks in his bloodied hands. He held him and wept as he faded, convinced this would be the last time he'd ever feel his hands on Jedediah's skin. He repeated between sobs as he fell to his knees. I told you once that only two things will have me. You and death. Akmenra gripped the mound of melted plastic in his hand, the metal of Octavius's armor still jutting out, now covered in a fine layer of rust. Time had taken its toll on everyone. Come on, you two, just give me something. Something that lets me speak to you again, something. The remains shuddered in Akmenra's grasp. The pharaoh squealed as he dropped it to the ground. The mask continued to shake, almost violently. What madness is this? From the corpse burst a hand that gripped towards the sky. A second, lifting himself from the years-old plastic, a naked Jedediah coughing as he took in his first breath. The mask cracked and chipped as he emerged from what was his corpse. It had begun to shrink in size as well, the plastic molding itself into Jedediah's new form. His hair no longer blonde and his hat missing, but his eyes still that fateful blue. Jedediah! Oh, by the gods! Akmenra picked up the coughing miniature. Akmenra? Jedediah's speech was slow and strained. His newly formed vocal cords were just getting used to being used. Akmenra's vision was obscured by tears as he nodded. It's me, Jedediah. It's me, he sobbed, lifting the miniature to his chest. Denial unraveling. Nick had returned Jedediah to his diorama, giving the shuddering cowboy a piece of fabric from the restoration area to cover himself with. You can talk to us when you're ready, okay, big guy? He spoke softly to Jedediah, who solemnly nodded. The others in the diorama helped him to his tent, where they thought it best to give him some privacy. They could barely remember what happened when they were in his soul, but what they did remember, they wished they could forget. Wrapped in the fabric scrap, Jedediah's eyes were glazed over. He was alive again. His heart beat, his lungs drew breath, his blood pumped through his veins. A second chance, the thing no being should be given in regards to death. He was alive, without Octavius. Pulling his knees to his chest and laying his head upon them, he sobbed, his tears falling onto his bare skin. His heart ached in his chest, compressed with his agonizingly short breaths, the twitching of his abdominals as he heaved. He didn't know whether or not he was going to vomit. He'd take the eyes again over this pain. He'd take Pompeii again. He'd take the hourglass. He'd take anything over this. Anything at all. This must be my true judgment, the cowboy thought. This is hell. The way ahead felt lonely. Chapter 3. Tonight is the last night of the world. The domus was silent. Light cascaded in through the windows, slow and sickly yellow. The loaf of bread had been left to rot, never baked, fostering a colony of mold and yeast beneath the washcloth. Octavius laid on his side in his room, curled beneath the sheets, the ache of time crushing his broken heart. If he focused, he could still smell Jedediah on the sheets. He'd wanted to take Jedediah as his own in this bed, to defy Rome by submitting and being submitted to spend the evening with him, sweaty and intimate and alone. That moment would never come to pass now. This was his eternity. Everything he'd ever wanted. A simple life, a simple home, a few acres of his own rather than the entirety of Rome. It felt empty now. Without Jedediah to share it all with, it meant nothing. It may as well be dust. He may as well be dust. Tears silently dripped from his eyes as Octavius prepared for infinity. This must be my true judgment, the general thought. This is Tartarus. He hadn't noticed the guide of the dead enter his home. Conjuring a cigar, they lit it and took a long, solemn drag. Psychopomp released the smoke from their mouth with a rattling sigh. You know, I can send you back too. Octavius slowly turned to them, acknowledging their presence. I don't give a fuck about any of these people. Khonsu, Jupiter, fucking Capital G, none of them. They don't give a fuck what I think either. I'm just the guy who drives the ferry. They rely on y'all to believe in them. They took another drag. It's not my job to obey any of those pantheons. It's my job to ferry the dead to what's next. Gods die too, of course, when there's no one left to believe in them. Stars know I've shipped off a few in my time. Octavius did not respond. I think they're scared of me. When the last living thing dies, so will the last god. And I'll make my last ride. And I'll trade in the old girl and go get into macrame or something. And everything they've ever done will cease to matter. Even gods run out of time. They breathed the purple smoke into their hand. It began to swim around, solidifying into a pocket watch. Speaking of time, I can give you 24 hours. They placed the watch on Octavius's nightstand. You and Yeehaw got the one thing that can overpower any of the old laws these deities put into place. Love. That's the one thing that can undo curses, reverse prophecy even. So, because you and him are so good at that old magic, I want to put it to the test. They extinguished the cigar in a puff of golden mist. 24 hours to say what you need to say, prove what you gotta prove, and do what you need to do. With one condition. Octavius picked up the hand-sized clock. It was made of silver and glittered in the sun. If you can find something that makes you happier than paradise, you can stay. If you can prove that a finite life would be better than eternal splendor, I will return your soul to the mortal realm. Octavius ran his fingers over the watch's design, processing Psychopomp's offer. He chuckled a bit. None of what you've said sounds right. The two looked at one another. You're offering to send me back to life, to find something that makes me happier than eternal happiness. And we both know who's down there. It's been explicitly stated that I'm meant to be here, and you're actively going against a mandate from a god. You're setting me up to win, and surely you'll incur consequences for defying the gods. Psychopomp smiled. You want to see your boyfriend again or not? And don't call me shyly. Octavius looked at the watch again, and nodded, letting out a small laugh at Psychopomp's joke. Of course I do. Psychopomp nodded. It's not like you won't see me again, Octavius. Even your buddy with the tablet won't escape my grasp. Though that does explain how I haven't filled out my ancient Egyptian table yet. Ain't gotten his soul yet. I'd rather not think about the day the tablet truly loses its magic. We've already dealt with a situation like that. Psychopomp chuckled as they extended a hand. We got a deal then? Octavius shook the guide's hand. Yes. The silver pocket watch glittered with golden light. See you in a while then, bub. And darkness yet again. A glimpse of hope in trying times. Octavius awoke in Rome, his arm holding a sword aloft, his stance wide, as though commanding his legions. His armor was no longer silver, but instead a glittering gold. The darkness of the night had reached the stroke of 12, exactly midnight. Octavius noticed his citizens meandering about quietly, as if in mourning. Of course they would be in mourning, Octavius thought. I've been dead and they've just woken up to find out about it. Two of the soldiers took notice of the general, standing proud over the training grounds. Imperator Octavius? Octavius waved to the men. Ah, Septimius, Trajan, do be a kind soul and help me down from here. Septimius approached with tears in his eyes to help his general down from the platform, Trajan following behind. We thought you dead, Imperator, taken from us across the Styx. Octavius rested a heel in Trajan's hand, propelling himself down. I thought that as well, lad. As Octavius acquired his balance, Septimius hugged his general tight. He'd take whatever punishment was required. He was just happy to have his leader back. Octavius ruffled the soldier's black curls as he was embraced. Easy, Septimius, I'm not going anywhere. Trajan embraced him as well, trapping Octavius between two young recruits in the center of his diorama. Trajan released him as quickly as he'd grabbed him. You're so cold, Imperator. Are you well? Octavius was swiftly reminded of the deal. 24 hours to do what needs to be done. Yes, I am well. I cannot explain my return just yet, but I will. Right now, I need to get to Jedediah. The two soldiers looked at each other. He's been a wreck since he got back, Statimius said. Octavius furrowed his brow. Take me to him. In the west, the work on the railroad continued. Javier had taken up leadership in Jedediah's absence. The workers came to a mutual agreement. He needed some time to adjust. They were aware of what had happened, of their deaths, but none of what truly tormented Jedediah's heart. He sat beneath a small tree, staring out into the painted distance of his diorama, the desert extending forever in 2 dimensions. Jedediah strummed the strings of his guitar. He'd managed to make one in his spare time before England, but he was still a bit rusty. After a few discordant twangs, he found his rhythm. He began with the G chord. Oh, where can my baby be? C. The Lord took him away from me. G. He's gone to heaven, so I've gotta be good. C. So I can see my baby when I leave this world. He ended with a D chord, followed by 2 Gs. Good to know my singing voice ain't leave me, Jedediah thought as he changed his hand's position. Time for a different tune. He didn't notice the string of gasps and murmurs as a certain Roman made his way across the worksite to Jedediah. His fingers moved quickly now, a string of notes coming out. They cascaded over the barren desert of his diorama, barely audible over the working crowd. At last, he began to sing with a strike of the D chord. Did you see the frightened ones? Did you hear the falling bombs? A breath. Did you ever wonder why we had to run for shelter when the... He could never remember the next part. When the promise of a brave new world unfurled beneath a clear blue sky. Jedediah looked up to see who finished his song. He knew that voice. Octavius. Hello, love. Jedediah's eyes filled with fresh tears as he rose from the ground. Hesitantly, he approached Octavius. You real? I'm not crazy? Carefully, Jedediah rested his gloved hand on Octavius's cheek, just as it was done to him many times before. Octavius cupped Jedediah's cheek in return, feeling for his scruff, but finding none. I like what you've done with your hair. Jedediah laughed a bit as his tears began to streak down his face. Octavius's eyes were wet with his own tears as he laughed with him. I like your new armor. The 2 men smiled for a moment. Can I kiss you? Jedediah asked. Of course. Octavius came closer. The 2 men's lips met once more as their eyes closed. Octavius ran his hand through Jedediah's red locks, the other holding him close round the ribcage. Jedediah's arms wrapped around Octavius's shoulders, holding him close as if his soul would escape again. They cared not who saw, even as eyes began to lock onto them. Jedediah pulled away after a moment. Your lips are so cold, Aki. Are you feeling okay? Octavius wiped the tears from his lover's eyes. Jedediah, there's something I have to tell you. Chapter 4. And at dawn, armed with glowing patience, we will enter the cities of glory. Jedediah was silent for a long moment. They had returned to his tent for Octavius to explain the situation in detail. So, you have a day to find something that makes you happier than what was over there. Octavius nodded, his hand clasping Jedediah's. Both men sat on Jedediah's bed, legs over the edge. We gotta find something that fits that criteria, and quick. Thing is, up there you had everything you ever wanted. Jedediah began to raise his voice. You had your home, your land, your peace and quiet. You had the life you dreamed of. Jedediah rose from his bed to pace around his tent. What possible thing on this mortal plane could bring you more happiness than all of that? Octavius said nothing. What could possibly make you happier than that? You. Jedediah was silent again. A blush came to his face. What? Octavius took Jedediah's gloved hands in his own. Gently, he rested his forehead against his lover's knuckles. It's you, Jedediah. Octavius rose to meet Jedediah's gaze, his face red with blush. What we did when we were dead. I loved it all. Holding you, kissing you, existing near you. All of those things made my afterlife worth living. Octavius kissed Jedediah on his right index knuckle. I sent you back here because I wanted you to have a second chance. Out of the two of us, you deserve it the most. Octavius, you're an excellent leader. You have a community that depends on you, and your work ethic ensures that your people will prosper. He held a hand over his still heart. I am a general, a cog in the machine of Rome. I am no emperor, though I share the memories of one. I am not Caesar. I am replaceable. You, though. Jedediah removed his hat and let it hang on a hook that dangled from the roof of the tent. You are a beacon, one in a million. I am one of a million. If anyone deserved that second chance, it's you. Octavius's now empty hands rested, joined at his front, his eyes gazing down at the floor. You really meant what you said in Pompeii, didn't you? Octavius nodded. Jedediah's now ungloved hands cupped Octavius's cheeks, lifting his gaze to meet his own. I meant what I said in my paradise, too. He met Octavius's cold lips once more, if only for a moment. Let's make tonight special, Jedediah said with a mischievous smile. Octavius rose a brow, but when he saw Jedediah start to undo his bandana and shirt's buttons, he got the message. With a small laugh, he undid his helmet strap, releasing his brown curls for what felt like the first time in years. Time is 10 till sunrise. Places, people, places. Nick called down the hallways, making sure everyone knew to get back to their areas. Jedediah and Octavius remained in bed, embracing one another. They had gone for at least 2 more rounds, and they were thoroughly spent. It's time to get back to our places, love, he whispered to his cowboy. Can't we rest, just for a day? Octavius let out a gentle laugh as he released Jedediah from his embrace. I'm afraid we can't, Carissime. We have our duty. Jedediah let out a mock sigh. Fine, I'll turn back into plastic, I guess. He fished around on the floor for his underwear. Can we do this again soon? Octavius turned to Jedediah as he asked the question, slipping his tunic on over his head. Jedediah, we're together now. We can make love whenever we wish. The cowboy blushed as he finally found his underwear. 'Cause I want to do that with you all the time. Octavius strapped his breastplate back on, followed by his sandals. And we will. Meet me at my domus, tomorrow night. Jedediah buttoned his shirt and nodded. I must make my way back to Rome, Carissime. I'll see you at dusk. Jedediah pulled up his jeans, zipping the fly. It's a date. With one last kiss, Octavius exited the tent, strapping on his helmet. Back in Rome, the soldiers broke formation as their general attempted to assume his regular position. He was hounded with 1,000 questions, most of them questioning how he could be alive at all, and the rest about where he got that shining golden armor. He only laughed and said, I shall explain tomorrow evening. Please, it's only 5 until sunrise. As he stood atop his podium, he unsheathed his gladius, pointing its blade towards the sky. The soldiers followed suit in perfect rows, a well-oiled machine. The sun broke over the horizon. Octavius watched his legion turn to plastic and braced himself to change. But it never happened. What on earth? Nick was making his rounds through the museum, making sure everyone had returned to their places. He'd only had to adjust one of the Huns' arms a bit so far. As he walked through the hall of miniatures, he heard a voice. Nicholas, I still seem to be active. Nick peered into the Roman diorama to see Octavius waving at him from his podium. Octavius? Chapter 5. A longing to be absorbed for a while into a different and beautiful world. Larry was weeping like a baby as he held Octavius against his cheek. Most of what he said was gibberish, but the few phrases that got out were of immense relief, saying things like, I thought I'd lost you. I thought I'd never see you again. I missed you so much. Nick hung up his coat on a hook by the door, kicking off his shoes in the entryway. How is this even possible? First Jed comes back, and you show up out of nowhere, Nick asked with a yawn. Octavius's eyes looked to the floor as he was held against Larry's growing stubble. I'll explain everything to you in the exhibits tonight. I'd rather just say it once. Nick was too tired from a night's work to really object. With another yawn and a nod, he shuffled off to bed. Larry took a breath and let Octavius down onto the counter. "I'd ask how all this happened, but you said you'd explain tonight." Octavius nodded. "In the meantime, Larry, please, catch me up on how life has been." Larry turned towards the coffee maker and poured some into a mug. "Sure. Let's talk in the living room," he said as he held a hand out for Octavius to hop onto. Octavius saw the beautiful morning sun for the second time. His body felt as though it should be crumbling to dust, but it wasn't. Instead, he only felt the cold hands of death running along his bones. Could you see us?" Larry took a sip from his coffee. "What?" "Nick and I, we couldn't throw you and Jed out. We kept what was left of you while you were gone. I guess Jed's made up of it now. But when we had it..." Larry swirled his coffee in the mug. "There was an eye. Just one. We couldn't tell whose it was." Octavius shivered as he remembered all the eyeball-based troubles he went through while dead. "So, could you see us?" Octavius shook his head. "No, I'm afraid not. The only glimpse we got of the mortal world was when I sent Jedediah back." "You sent him back?" He remembered the words of Khonsu. "We made a deal." The main group had gathered together in the entrance hall. After the obligatory crying at their friend's miraculous return from the dead, they had gathered to hear what he had to say. Octavius sat on a matchbox on the desk, hands clasped together. "I assume you're all wondering how I got back." A murmur ran through the group. "I made a deal with death, I suppose." Jedediah knew who he was referring to. The rest pictured their idea of death. "I was given 24 hours to find something that would make me as happy as heaven itself." The time read 11:59. "I am pleased to say that I have found it. If death upholds the end of the deal, I will return to life with you all." Octavius rose from his seat. "If not, I would like to extend my thanks for a good life, and my hope to see you again." Jedediah tried to approach Octavius for a hug. He noticed the sickly pallor of his lover's skin. He looked almost gray in this light. Octavius reached his arms out to Jedediah, who held him close. Jedediah's warm skin felt nice in Octavius's cold touch. "Are you two?" Larry asked, trailing off. "Lovey," Attila said with a smile. "Oh, they have never been subtle about it. Honestly, I was just waiting for them to swallow their pride." Akmenrod gossiped into Nick's ear. "I know. I've been waiting for them to get together since I was a kid," Nick gossiped back. The clock's hands met at 12. A sudden wind blew through the halls, chilling everyone to their bones. Someone new was there. A person, dressed in black. Their shoes were white and fit for running. Their jeans were covered in patches, each with a different message. Memento Mori. Protect trans kids. Punk's not dead, purposely misspelled. The jeans seemed more patched than denim. Their hoodie was cotton and covered in an equal amount of patches. One patch caught the attention of the group more than the others. The patch atop the hood. It read differently to each person in the room. To Nick, Jed, and most of the exhibits, it read Reaper in big red letters. Akmenrod saw Anubis. Attila saw Tengri emblazoned atop a red sword, the sword that prophesied that he was to rule the world. Dexter saw a set of sharp teeth, as though some bloody predator was clasping the patch with their fangs. In their gloved hands was a silver baseball bat. Not a single inch of skin could be seen on the figure's entire body, as though a single sight would identify them. The figure's face was covered by a red bandana, their eyes shrouded by their hood, yet every member of the museum family could see the holy light that burned in them. The figure twirled their bat as they hummed a song Octavius recognized. "Destination unknown, ruby, 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 Soho." Octavius looked once more to his family, and with a nod, he stepped forward. "Hello, Psychopomp. Finally dropped the Lloyd Mercury business, huh?" Psychopomp set the business end of their bat on the ground with a hollow, ominous ting. It ran through the halls of the museum, sharp and cold like an icicle. "So, Octavius, present your Arcadia." Chapter 6. Stay light, there is a rainbow coming. There was silence in the halls that night. Octavius kept his gaze on the Guide of the Dead, despite the aching dread in the pit of his stomach. Jedediah stayed by his side, even though his legs were telling him to run. The others had backed up, the presence of a stranger in their midst. Nick wielded his flashlight in one hand, just as Larry had taught him. "Come on, bub. I don't have all night," Psychopomp stated. Octavius nodded and stepped forward again. "Great Guide of the Dead, leader of dreams and spirits, I present my finite joy that outdoes heaven itself." Octavius bowed, down to one knee. "He has been given the name Jedediah Smith, and he is my Arcadia." Jedediah's cheeks turned a shade of red. "Within this single day on earth, he has brought me joy that paradise could not compare to. He has loved me. He has held me. He has let me stay in his arms." Nick and Akmanrao met eyes for a moment, each with a knowing look. Oh, they're definitely fucking, they each thought. "If I must turn my back to eternal splendor, I will. If I must face such powers as an enemy, I will. If I must doom my being for eternity, I will. But you will not take me from my Arcadia." He held Jedediah's hands in his own. "Heaven cannot compare to my life with him. He is the object of my desire. He is the reason for my being." Jedediah's blushing face was hidden beneath his hat, but that smile couldn't be hidden even behind a layer of lead. Psychopomp didn't say anything, but those burning eyes showed a smile. "That works for me." Whirling their bat, they rested its end before Octavius. "By the power vested in me, by the machinations of reality, I return you to life." Octavius took his first breath. Tears streamed down his face as he did. A newborn cries to begin breathing. And fuck what the folks next door gotta say about it. A thunderclap echoed outside. Psychopomp laughed, extending their arms out as though crucified, bat still in hand. "It's a new day, folks, and I've managed to piss off every god we've got." Through the skylight, in a rain of shattered glass, their taxi crashed into the main room. "I'm gonna have so much explaining to do when I get back. Listen up, all of y'all." They pointed to the group with their bat. "You won't escape dying, even with that tablet. You'll see me again. Some sooner than others." They winked at Nick and Larry. "And I'll remember you. Just tell me I was there at Arcadia, and I'll handle the rest." Sitting in the driver's seat, they buckled their belt and threw their bat into the back seat. "Later!" They slammed the door of their taxi and drove straight into the sky, back through the broken glass. Their triumphant laughter echoed into the night as the shattered pieces rose to repair themselves. The Daly family no longer feared death. Octavius and Jedediah laid flat on their backs in the grass of the old Africa exhibit. The area had been closed off while the workers were renovating. The air had a thin layer of dust throughout. "Apparently they're making this place into a botanical area, helping folks learn all about the flora and fauna in New York." "Yes, like the humble pigeon," Octavius chuckled. "I need to study something, don't I? Might as well be a local area." Jed laughed as he reached into his vest for his journal. It took him a moment to realize that this is the journal Sa gave me. Octavius sat up. "You kept it?" Jedediah sat up as well. "I didn't think I'd see it again." He flipped through the pages. His drawings were still there, but the language was scrambled, indecipherable, a script not meant to be read by human eyes. As he turned a certain page, the strange orchid fell out of the journal, dried and preserved. "Oh, this thing!" He held up the wrinkled flower, its golden center still glittering. "I saw it and thought of you, so I tried to document it," he said, looking at Octavius, who smiled sheepishly and blushed at the mention of being thought of. "Needs a name, you know. Ain't no orchid like it." "What did you have in mind?" "Well, I don't know where it'd fall taxonomically," Jedediah overpronounced the word, "but I wanted species to be something about you." Octavius kissed Jedediah on his cheek. His skin felt warm and soft against his lips. "How about Jededoctavi?" Octavius suggested, putting his arm around Jedediah's shoulders. "Something for the both of us." It was Jedediah's turn to blush. "Yeah, I can live with that." Jedediah kept flipping through the pages of his journal. Nothing he'd written while dead was legible. With a sigh, he flipped one last page. He doodled a cloud he saw while in his paradise. Written next to his drawing was a message in messy but readable letters. You did good, bub. See you again sometime. Sigh. Huh. Guess they like my nickname for him. The planetarium was as silent as ever as the constellations pranced through the artificial sky, save for a single song. The two men were in an embrace, arms around one another, moving to a song Jedediah was singing. Them good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye, singing this'll be the day that I die. They came to a stop as they met one another's gaze. You gonna sing the next one? Of course. The two men began their dance again, lost in one another's eyes, the stars of the planetarium falling like a meteor shower. Octavius leaned in to get closer to those eyes. They at last closed as their lips met. Nothing on any plane, mortal or ethereal, mattered in this moment. Nothing but one another. Octavius began to sing. I can still see your face, although the years may force some change, and I know I'm no longer the same, and I hope I don't show it. I hope I don't show it, but my heart's the same. Chapter 7. Epilogue. Akmenra opened his eyes in a place he did not recognize. This was not his sarcophagus. It was something else entirely. Tinted windows, leather seats, rain on the roof, a car. Pardon me. Akmenra tried to speak, but his voice was raspy and burnt. He could taste smoke in his mouth. I'd rest if I was you, bub. Akmenra recognized that voice. With a charred limb, Akmenra managed to open the partition. Who are you? The driver looked back at the pharaoh, eyes burning with a holy light that Akmenra recognized. I've got a million names, bub. Given your upbringing, you'd probably call me Anubis. Akmenra remembered. I was there at Arcadia. The cab screeched to a sudden halt. The driver leaned back to look at Akmenra, elbow over the partition. So you finally bit it. The smile on their face was full of glory. Let's not waste time then. You gotta get judged and off to paradise with the rest of them. Akmenra did not know what psychopomp meant, but somehow felt at ease. The rest of them? He coughed out. Your buddy's at the museum. I managed to get Larry and Nick first, damn human lifespans. Then old Ted melted during transport and was reused for candles. Attila was thrown out and got compacted. Akmenra finally understood what too dark was. Waya got sent to an army factory when they discovered plastic shells and needed more. The monkey ended up decomposing too much to be repaired. The minis got it real nasty. Another fire, same one that got you, actually. Psychopomp laughed at a joke only they got. At least this time I didn't yank those two lovebirds out of Pompeii. Akmenra felt sick to his stomach. We died? Psychopomp nodded. Can't outrun death forever. Good news is, you and the rest got connected pathways. Night never ends in your case, bub. The taxi came to a stop in front of a large pyramid. Akmenra's door opened, and his burns receded. He stepped out of the car, standing before the large building. I do hope my heart balances. Only one way to find out. And the guide led the pharaoh up the steps. Here it comes! Jedediah called from the roof of Attila's yurt. The group had decided to spend the day in Attila's steppe and were taking a break from their riding trail. Jedediah hopped down from the roof as the others came out of the structure. He and Octavius were a more substantial size now, Octavius rivaling Attila in height, and Jedediah finally able to meet Larry's gaze. Psychopomp's taxi parked right in front of the tent's door. Oi, night party! Got one last latecomer! The door opened as Akmenra stepped out, his golden outfit now dyed purple, still shining in the sun. Hi, Ak, Nick said with a smile. Larry was with him, sitting in a rocking chair with Dexter. Welcome home, lad, Teddy said, his voice choking with tears. It's good to see you again, Akmenra. Sacagawea wiped a tear from her eye. Aki, Attila called from the back of the crowd. Took you long enough, Jedediah said with a laugh. We've been waiting for you. Octavius called, his arm around Jedediah's shoulders. Aquanra's eyes filled with tears, and he ran to the open arms of his family.